now. Okay, so welcome everybody. It's really good to have you here. For those of you who don't know who I am, I'm Mary Hawes. I'm the National Children and Youth Advisor for the Church of England. And it's a great privilege today to be on this call with Krish Kandiah and also with Christopher Muwanguzi, who Krish will introduce in a moment. Krish will be familiar to many of you. He's the chair of the Adoption Specialist Guardianship Board. He's also one of the commissioners on the Archbishop of York and Archbishop of York and Canterbury's Commission on Families and Households. And he's also, as if that wasn't enough, just co-authored a book with his wife, which is taking away the idea that the Bible is about nice, white, middle-class people, actually puts some of the characters in the Bible in their locations. I'm really enjoying reading it. A lot of poetic license in there, Krish, but huge amounts that I'm learning. So Krish, I'm going to hand over to you. Thank you so much for your time. We're looking forward to what you have to offer us today. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you, Mary. It's been great working with you on the Archbishop's Commission. And I feel like I've been following you around the country in various seminars this week. So it's nice to work with you. Hey, happy Black History Month, everybody. That's one of the reasons why we're doing this seminar right now. But we're doing it, I guess it's a little bit like Christmas. If you're part of a church, Christmas is for life, not just for Christmas, right? We care about Jesus's incarnation, not just on one day of the year, but every day that we're alive. And for me, racial justice matters all through the year. It's a priority for Christians to care about justice because we worship a God of justice. And we don't only care about racial justice, we care about other issues such as poverty, economic justice, climate justice. I'm very involved in the whole world of immigration and asylum and how Christians can show mercy and hospitality to those people who are in need. So this isn't a one-trick pony. We're not getting on a bandwagon. We're just making use of this important opportunity to talk about race. And I'm going to come up with a whole bunch of practical suggestions for you if you're in youth work or children's work or you're a parent or a carer. But I really want to frame this conversation right at the beginning and just wrestle with the why should we care? Because if you get this right, everything else kind of follows. If you're motivated, you can find a way to solve problems. But if you're not motivated, I can give you loads of solutions and you'll never use them. So we need to talk a little bit about motivation. And I guess quite early doors, I'd love you to meet my friend Chris Muwanguzi. Chris, you want to come off mute and let us see you?
Hi, Krish. Hi, everybody. Very nice to be here. Thank you for having me.
Excellent. So Chris is a fantastic Christian leader. We know each other best through the work that he's doing through the Child's Eye Foundation, which is doing amazing work helping children move out of institutional care, particularly in Uganda, but widely across Africa, towards family-based care. So if you're currently supporting an orphanage, please talk to Chris or me, because I think we can take you on a journey to rethink that. But that's not our main reason for meeting today. Chris, I really just wanted to hear from you. As a parent particularly, I've met some of your children, at least online, not face-to-face yet, and they're absolutely gorgeous. Why is it important that we help our children wrestle with some of these issues of race? What are some of your experiences where actually it hasn't been that easy, or maybe you've had some really difficult experiences you could share with us so that we can understand why this really matters?
Thanks, Krish. Straight in with the very difficult questions. There's quite a few questions there, so I'm going to try and answer them very clearly. And folks, obviously there's not enough I could say here, so I'm very happy for people to send Krish and Mary questions that I can answer. I think my experience with race, folks, obviously starts with me as an individual. I'm married to an amazing woman who we've had 2 children, 3 and 8 years old with. You know, we've raised our children to appreciate and understand and respect and celebrate beautiful, all things bright and beautiful, all creatures great and small. God made them all. And the reason this is so important, Krish, is, we often talk about children or people being colorblind. We often say, I'm colorblind. And I just want to address that as the experience and help you understand how that is very important for me as a Black African man and my children growing up in this country. The very simple thing I'll say about using colorblind is that we are not celebrating difference. And so one of the most important things is to celebrate difference and to acknowledge it right from the start. To prepare for this, I came up with a few things that will answer Krish's question. I think the first thing I'll say, and I'll tell you why they're important really quickly, is we've had to be prepared to talk about race and events that surround race. And when you talk about race, you will inevitably talk about racism. Growing up in the UK, I've experienced it sometimes, not often, and not as often as others. I've experienced it in the stereotypical context of a police situation, so either being stopped or asked for information. I used to work with young Black boys in London and run a big program called Boys to Men that supported over 850 boys a year. And a lot of those boys came to talk to us about their own racial injustice that they'd experienced. So I'm really well aware of it. So the first thing I've learned because of that is to talk about it and not to be shy about talking about it. We're always prepared to talk about sexual health. We'll also talk about disability. But if you can talk about all those things, then talk about race. The other really important thing for me is just helping our children to recognize the harm of racist ideas. It also happens with our children. So I don't know if you'll remember football. England, the 3 young Black boys or young Black men that missed those penalties and what ensued. Our experience in our house was so difficult. We were excited about watching England. We sat up, we prepared, we had popcorn. And at the end of that, my wife and I looked at each other thinking, we're going to have to talk about this because they're going to go to school tomorrow and something is inevitably going to happen. So I'm not going to go into the detail, but it's that thinking. We've updated our home library, and I'll make 2 additional points, Krish, I'll stop there. And we've been working on this for a very long time. So I brought some books about, not just about race, but just about ensuring that you share diversity in your home. And I can share the titles of some of these books. So this is The Turtle and the Island, a folktale from Papua New Guinea. We've got Nkoza and Nyaka. We've got Let's Go to the Farm, but Let's Go to the Farm has a Black child in it. Some of you might have heard of Ada Twist, Scientist, a really fantastic show on television. A really cool book is Jabari Jumps, a really fantastic book. So I could go on, there's a lot more. Making sure you teach the full history. Mansa Musa, the great emperor of Africa. So my son often says to me, the greatest emperors were from Rome. And I say, actually, son, you need to hear about some of the great emperors from Africa. Don't make talking about race, a one-time event. The fact that it's happened and we've got this big uprise has made it feel like people only talk about it when something happens. But actually, we should talk about it most of the time. And the last one I'll really leave you guys with is, actually the last 2 things is, make sure that you surround yourself with diversity. We've talked a lot about social mobility and tried to understand the concept of it for our young Black boys, our young brown boys, white working class families. If you surround yourself with who and what you are, even as a Christian, you're missing out on the diversity that God has given us to celebrate in this world. And the final bit is we don't have all the answers. And so asking questions of children has become so important. My 3-year-old daughter goes to a nursery that is mostly white children. She talks about their hair. So what we've done is done so much with her hair and helped her talk about her hair when she goes back to school. And we've also talked to the school about celebrating that. The one thing that's really been powerful for me as a parent is I haven't let small incidents pass, and I've also addressed them with grace. So I've gone back to the teachers and said, oh, my daughter said this, or this happened. And we've had an opportunity in a safe space to talk about these things. 5 years ago, I would have been very fearful that I might have been seen as the angry brown or the angry black man addressing an issue with my children, but it's about having that conversation quite openly and respecting how people perceive it. A lot of people see white as right and also see the culture of white as what exists. So my child will see mostly white images. She'll see Jesus as white. She'll see lots of things as white and ask herself why there isn't anybody else of color. Understanding and talking about those things, but making sure that you're not trying to answer them in the way that you think is right, is something we all need to be careful about as parents. So I'm going to stop there, Krish. I hope I haven't said too much, but I hope...
No, it's great. Chris, it's always a pleasure. And there'll be a chance for people to ask you some questions as we go through. And I know a lot of people are interested in the books that you've suggested. Here's a quick challenge. Just audit if your church has a nursery, if your school has a library, if your family has a collection of children's books, either for your kids or for grandkids or nephews and nieces, just see how diverse they are. That really matters, doesn't it? Because this is what we're feeding our children. So thank you very much. I just want to reiterate Chris's first point about talking about race. Some people say, well, we don't need to speak to children about race. You know, we save that until they're older. I would say, in the same way that people ask me, when's the best time to tell your child that they're adopted? I say, well, even probably before they're able to speak. You know, just there's never a time when they don't know they're adopted. It just becomes a normal part of the world that they live in. And so I think if we, as you know, we're speaking from a Christian framework here, we care about a God that loves the world, there should never be a time when our kids haven't had that issue addressed. It's just always been part of the background noise of our life together. And for me, it was really poignant. You can't protect your children from race and racism. You know, watching an England match should be just a family occasion. We had our neighbours round, our little kids were there, we all got our England t-shirts on, we've made England cakes, and yet they're seeing it. You know, they're seeing it immediately in that game, at the end of that game. And, you know, the whole nation was talking about it. So you can't protect children from race and racism. So we need to prepare them to engage with it from a Christian perspective. So really, really helpful, Chris. I think the other thing that we need to realize is that race and racism impacts children, and they might not realize it, but it impacts children. So you might not know this, but Black Caribbean children are 3.5 times more likely to be excluded than all other children at primary, secondary, and in special education needs schools. So they might be on the receiving end of a form of racism without even knowing it. So again, we need to talk about it. Across the UK, Black children were over 4 times more likely than white children to be arrested. We're not talking about stop and search. That's another stat I'm going to give you. But even arrested, Black children under 18s more likely to be arrested. BAME people have a higher risk of becoming seriously ill or dying as a result of the coronavirus. We saw that. So again, many children have lost relatives, whether aunties and uncles or grandparents, and that has a race element to it. There is a greater increase in depression, anxiety, self-harm, suicidal thoughts among BAME young people compared to white peers. That was during the COVID-19 pandemic. We also know that BAME young carers can struggle to get the help they need, and were found lockdown especially isolating. And you know this stat, I'm sure, Black people now are nearly 10 times more likely to be stopped and searched by the police than white people. So race and racism impacts directly, indirectly, visibly, or implicitly the lives of children. So to equip them to live in this world is an important value. So talk about race. Let me just unpack for you the 4 levels of racism that we need to be aware of. And I think, again, all of us have the capacity, consciously or unconsciously, to be involved in all 4 levels. And I think that can include children too. It's possible for a child to be a victim of racism, but it's also possible for a child to be racist, whether implicitly or explicitly. But let me talk that through with you. So there are 4 levels of racism. You can probably think about it like an onion. I'm going to try and share some of these slides with you later. My tech is not working for me well today. So the first form of racism is what I would call internalized. And that's a belief that you as an individual have about people from different ethnicities, internalized racism. Now, you might not know that's how you think, you might not be aware of it, but you could still be doing it. So there's implicit and explicit internalized racism. And just so you know, despite views to the contrary, I think all of us, independent of our ethnicity, have the potential to have racist views and racist internalized thought processes. So for me, I am brown. My mother was from India. Her mother was Indian. Her father was Irish. My father is from Malaysia, but his father was Sri Lankan. Okay. And I was brought up in an environment where in my father's side of the family, if you had very dark skin and you were still Asian, you were from a different caste, so you might know about the caste system. There were all sorts of rules about who you could and couldn't marry, who you could associate and who you couldn't. Coming to the UK changed that for me. My father didn't kind of embody that in this culture, but his wider family did. And some of my cousins were told off for marrying or dating people with the wrong color of skin, even though they were brown themselves. In the US, they call that colorism. And that relates to how Black people of differing skin tones treat one another. I also notice it in myself. If a tradesman comes to my door and he knocks on there and I open the door to him, if he has an Irish accent and he's offering to resurface my driveway, I sense in myself an instant suspicion because of the way I've been socialized to think that, you know, if you're coming with that accent and you're, you know, in that trade, I can't trust you. And I've got to catch myself and go, oh my goodness, you know, that's not appropriate, you know, but I've got to name it and get it out there. So I think all of us have the capacity for internalized racism, and that can happen at kind of any age. But if you start moving out of the onion level, so internalized racism starts here. Interpersonal racism is when you begin to work out those internalized racist views and you put them into practice in the way that you as an individual treat another individual. So you might have thoughts like this. So I've got an internalized racist attitude to people with an Irish accent offering me to repurpose my drive, but I can choose whether it ends there and I deal with it, or it works its way out into interpersonalized racism. And I now won't listen to this guy's pitch. I will not employ him because I've made those assumptions. Does that make sense? But I can stop it. So interpersonal racism is between individuals. The next level would be institutional racism. That happens when there is bias within a particular institution. So let's say a school might have what we might consider a bias in the way that it treats students. I've been to churches, individual churches, where there is bias. Sadly, in the history of the UK church, I've heard so many stories of individual churches when the Windrush generation turned up at the church. The vicar kindly comes alongside this new Black family and says, it's great that you've come this morning, but please don't come again. You're making other members of the congregation uncomfortable. That would be an instance of institutional racism. One particular church treating somebody because of the color of their skin in an unjust, unhelpful way. Now, the last layer is what you might describe as structural racism. And that goes beyond an individual institution and then becomes more endemic. So if, for example, a whole denomination of churches thought that way and practiced that way, that's moved from an institutional racist environment to a structural racist environment. Or not just a single school, but all schools. Suddenly, you've moved it to another level. And all four of those levels can impact the lives of children. And therefore, helping children navigate race is an important gift that we give to children to cope in the world today. I describe myself, because I've borrowed it completely from one of my favorite TV shows, which doesn't have enough Black characters. at the West Wing, I describe myself as a practical idealist. I would love to live in a world where there was no racism, but I'm practical, and I realize we're not living in a world where there is no racism, and therefore I need to help my children navigate how to live life in a racialized world, and that's part of their equipping. And I recognize my children can be part of the solution, or they can be part of the problem, and it's on me as a parent or as a leader to help shape them in an appropriate way. Okay, so look, point one, talk about racism to help children engage with this issue, because if they don't, we leave them ill-prepared for the world that we're actually living in. I'm a huge fan of this TV show. If you've got Disney Plus, there's a fantastic TV show called Mixed-ish. It's by the same guys that produced a TV show called Blackish. Blackish is probably one of my favorite TV shows just in general, but it's a fantastic comedy, and it really wrestles with some of the issues we're talking about today around racism, and particularly how Black people need to re-navigate life. So it's a Black comedy, probably made for Black people, but I think the rest of the world needs to watch it to understand how systems and structures work. It's got an interesting style in that it's funny, but it will often break and get quite expositional and help you deal with things. So they'll do an issue on hair, for example, or on colorism, and help you thrash it through. But the new series, Mixed-ish, is a spin-off show. And they talk about, so it's a mixed couple, Black woman, white guy, they get married, they have kids, but they decide to go and live in a commune somewhere. And this commune is at one level idealistic. There's no racism, there's no problems. And so these kids now, they've left the commune, but they're kind of secondary school age, and they are just not ready for life. They don't know how to cope. They're just so idealistic and naive. They are just more vulnerable as a result of being ill-prepared. So I think that's the situation that we can be in as churches, that we think, we assume the world's all lovely and nice out there, and it can be lovely and nice in the church, but we don't help kids to deal with the reality of what's going on in the world. And that's a problem. And so, addressing these issues really matter. I'm going to pause there. I have 9 other points, and a lot of them are going to be a lot faster than the one you just heard. But does anyone want to make a comment or share an experience? And, we are recording this, so, only share what you're happy to have out there. But does anyone want to share a comment or an experience, or even raise a question of what we've heard so far? Mary, can you spot any hands? You can wave at Mary, or you can digitally raise your hand.
I think it may be easier just for people to jump in, because we've got so many people, I can't see everybody on the screen. There was one comment earlier on about the importance of talking about race, but how do we not get it wrong? I think, speaking as a white middle-class woman, I'm always very, and Irish as well, Krish, Irish, I will never come and mend your drive. How do I not get it wrong? What terminology can I use that will not be offensive?
Yes. Good. I will come back. It just clicks out every 10 seconds. That's a really interesting question. And look, language is fast changing. So, when I was a boy, people would use the word coloured quite a lot. That has become a very offensive term, but people of colour wasn't offensive for a while. It's become another offensive term in some places. So it's very difficult. The language is changing very quickly. And it's okay to be tentative and humble. And sometimes you might just want to ask friends to give you advice, come with a spirit of humility and say, look, if I use a term that is inappropriate or unhelpful, let me know, but here's how I see things, and then allow people the opportunity to correct you. And I think coming with that humility can be really useful. So if you don't have many Black friends, that could be a challenge that we need to talk about in a minute. But you could ask, could you help me? I want to raise a son or a daughter who is going to be a person of justice in this world. And I recognize that race is something I'm not an expert in. could we tag team? Could we co-parent? Like, could we do this together? And you help me. If you're a white person, and you can say I've never experienced racism, but I want my child to be part of the solution, not part of the problem. Could you help me with this? So that can be quite a simple way.
Krish,
Interestingly,
if I can just jump in.
Oh, come on, Chris.
Well.
Yeah.
Just really quickly to just say that, I mean, that's a great question, and it's often asked, and I'm really happy when people ask that question, because I think that's the beginning of how. Chris has already addressed a really significant one. I just want to stress is with children, because this is about children, one of the ways that you can make sure you don't get it wrong is ask them why. So ask them why they see things, or what that means to them. The other really important thing is just reading and watching shows like, the ones that Krish has mentioned, the books that I've mentioned. There is so many really good documentaries of people speaking about the meaning of diversity and the impact that it's had on them. And there's a lot of awareness that we're learning from that. So watching, reading, listening, and I know that people learn differently. So all those things are really, really important. And I think another really important thing is to listen to what is a stereotype. Is this what society thinks, or is this the fact? Case in point, you're living next door to a Black family or a brown family or an Irish family, and people make a comment, or an Eastern European family, and people make a comment about that family. You don't bystand with those things. That's how you don't get it wrong. You say, I'm really sorry, but that isn't true. Why do you say that? Oh, well, I know that, Irish families do this, or brown or Black or Eastern European families or Romanian families do this. Not true. So addressing the stereotype and listening carefully to some of those things. Good. Somebody put in here the microaggressions that have been for a long time allowed to carry on, the jokes about people of a different color or a different culture. Those things have got to be addressed. So in answering the question, how do I not get it right? It's how do you get what has been wrong for such a long time wrong? How do you get that right?
Yeah, really you're so right. That's really helpful. Did someone else say something then?
No, it was just me saying thank you. That's excuse me, that's really helpful.
Good. Just another quick moment for any other comment or question from the rest of you. Okay, just to recap then, someone was asking, okay, we've heard about the what about the how? So I think you're hearing two things from both me and Chris here. So one is to be proactive. Okay, don't just assume everything's going to be fine. Let's think, no, we are living in a racialized world. I need to help my children do this. So I'm going to be proactive. I'm going to bring up conversations. There need to be, as a parent or as youth workers and children's workers, opportunities for us to teach children. Okay, that's our responsibility. Parents and youth and children's workers and other safe adults, we have some responsibility to teach children. So I'm going to be proactively building this into curricula. Things that I'm going to have an intentional conversation on, or throughout my year. Where do we talk about racial justice? When does that fit in? So there's the proactive side of things. And I'd love for you to think about the form that our Christian education takes. Just a sidebar for a moment. I don't know if you watched the Small Axe series of films. Just very, very powerful one. The one on education was particularly good. I mean, they were all excellent. The one called Education was good. And it kind of outlined in the 70s how Black children were often disproportionately placed into special needs schools because of structural and institutional racism, that Black children were considered to be backward just because of the color of their skin. So they disproportionately turned up in special needs schools, and it was totally inappropriate. And the Black community worked at two levels. One was a kind of political lobbying level to try and change that. The other was at a very practical level, that the Black community opened on Saturday mornings schools to try and help supplement the education that Black children were not receiving in mainstream school. And it wasn't just reading, writing, and arithmetic that they were taught. They were taught to value who they were as Black people. They were taught, some of their Black heroes. We're going to come on to that in a minute. Black history. Interesting. Chris is showing this, this book that says actually history is not just the history of white conquest around the world. There's a whole other bit of history out there, but they weren't getting taught that. So they took it on themselves to educate children. And I thought, through those schools, so many Black children were empowered to become not just wonderful citizens in our nation, but actually to become leaders. It was a formation for leaders to make social impact. Now, again, I've been a Sunday school teacher, and I was probably the world's worst Sunday school teacher. But the normal mode of education didn't feel like I'm empowering children to become leaders, to have a vision for social transformation. It was often biblical knowledge, and biblical knowledge should lead to that, but it was a kind of weird form of biblical knowledge. It was like the chemistry set I got when I was 11. I thought it was the coolest chemistry set in the world, but I did what every 11-year-old did. I took every single chemical and put them into one test tube and set fire to it, trying to get an explosion. But the clever people at the chemistry set manufacturers had taken every possible active ingredient out of that chemistry set. So no matter what you did to it, the worst it would happen is it would smell of someone breaking wind, right? They had thought about how to make it as unuseful as possible, unactive as possible. And sometimes it feels like that's what we've done with our Christian education. And it's not everywhere. I'm sure, Mary, and the work that you guys do is very different to that. But in many cases, it's a quietist education. We teach children basic facts about the Bible, but not necessarily to capture the passionate, radical, justice-driven heart of God that says, I'm going to go and make a difference in the world. That might come later. We hope it will come if you read enough of the Bible, but we teach the Bible in the way that I think often quietens kids down and fills them with knowledge rather than motivation. Anyway, sidebar over. If that's completely wrong and you've got better examples, tell me and I'll share them. Let me dive into some more things that I think we need to do. So the first one was talk about race. The second is create spaces. I was saying we need to be proactive in our education so that we talk about justice and racial justice with children, build it into your curriculum, but we also need to be reactive. Even in quite conservative Christian circles, they talk about teachable moments. And, that as you're going along, there are opportunities for you to talk about Christian things. So I want to include in those teachable moments opportunities to challenge injustice, to pursue, is this right? Is this good? What do we do? So I had a weird teachable moment this morning, just before I was on a call with you. The BBC Politics show phoned me because they're interested in covering the Afghan welcome stuff that we're doing. And I'm an evangelist, so I just wanted to drop in what I was doing next. I said, hey, look, I'm really sorry I've got to go in about 5 minutes, but I'm happy to answer your question. I'm leading a seminar on how we help children deal with racism and live in a racialized world. And I want her to ask me about it and who's going to be there. And she says, actually, I've got a really important question. My daughter, we're white, but her best friend is Bangladeshi. And my daughter's Bangladeshi friend said to my daughter, look, you will never understand me because I am brown and you are white. And it's harder being at school when you're brown than when you're white. And the mum says to me, like, hey, can you help me? I don't know what to say to my daughter. How can I help? What can I do? And so we kind of brainstormed a little bit. I'm very happy for you to come up with a better answer than I did. But it was, I just said, look, it's great that your daughter shared that with you, that she's having a conversation with you about race. That's really important. And that's to be, celebrated. Thank you for sharing that with me. I'm glad you've talked about it. That's something that it's always okay to talk about those kind of issues with me. That's not an embarrassing thing. So thank you. And it's great that your friend has been open with you and shared something that's really tough for her. And maybe something your daughter could say would be, thank you for telling me that. You're right. I don't understand what it's like to walk through the world in your shoes, but could you help me? I want to be a friend to you. How can you help me understand what it's like so that I can help you when it gets tough? And you're trying to kind of help children develop empathy, aren't you? To understand how another person walks through the world. Empathy is such a powerful gift. In the Bible, the other word for it is compassion, to feel along with somebody, isn't it? To try and understand what the world is like for them. And so, number one, talk about race. Number two, create spaces and time to be able to talk about that. Whether that is proactive or reactive, create space. And you create space relationally as well as chronologically. So, we as a family, we create space chronologically because dinner time is important. No one's on devices. Everybody's around the table. And sometimes it's just catching up on people's day and asking how things go. That is a chronological time. But hopefully, relationally is around that table, people can feel comfortable talking about anything. And me as a dad, I'm not going to jump on them and go, what? I'm going to be unshockable. And we've created the relational and chronological space for kids to kind of be open with us. And you know what that's like. Often I found in youth work, the most important conversations are not happening in the teaching time. It's often in the travel time or the waiting around for parents to pick up kids' time that those casual conversations take place. And it's just being aware to make use of them. Third point is build empathy. How can you help your child experience life through another person's experiences? Reading is fantastic for that. And we've seen some books for kind of younger children, which is great. I think try to get your kids to read biographies of people from different cultures, because you're seeing the world through their space. We've talked about Blackish and Mixedish as TV shows, which are also really helpful in that regard. But asking good questions, to help, look, when you're watching the England football game and black kids, teenagers are being treated terribly, would your children feel confident to be able to come alongside a black child in their school to say, look, I found that really tough last night watching that. What was it like for you? You're again helping them to create the empathy to develop those relationships. Number 4, model diversity. Okay. If you want to teach your children to be inclusive and welcoming and supportive of people from different cultures, to what extent are they seeing that in you as a youth leader? So as you check through your curriculum, our church that we go to uses a lot of YouTube videos. They're cheap, and, off they go. They'll show some YouTube videos in a Sunday, and then they'll do an activity. Okay, how many of those videos were of white people talking about Jesus? If you're going to use YouTube anyway, why don't you diversify it and make sure there's a bit of range, or guest speakers in your church or youth ministry, or if you're a family, how often are you breaking bread, sharing food with people from different cultures? What are your kids seeing in your friendship group, in the people that get invited to your home or that you go out on a social with or you holiday with? How diverse is that? If it's not diverse, you are implicitly creating an exclusive environment. So mix it up, be radical in your hospitality, because that's going to really help. I remember I often talk to parents about their ambitions for their children. And I ask Christian parents, what are your ambitions for your children? And people often say, I want them to get a good education, go to a good university, get a good job, marry someone nice, have some children. And I go, okay, that's great. That's every middle-class parent in the country's ambition. What specifically Christian ambitions do you have for your children? And sometimes parents will go, oh, yeah, wow, Christian, that's a good point. Well, I want them to be kind and generous and compassionate, and I want them to be people of justice. I say, okay, great. What is it that you're doing that's going to help children to have that vision for their lives? Because if we're not compassionate and kind and generous and seeking justice, then our kids won't be. So they need to see it. see it to be it, some people say. And so in the same way, if we want to raise inclusive, diverse, generous, non-racist children, let's model it, because that's going to help them.
Can I just jump in there real quick, Krish?
Yeah,
Sorry,
please, Chris, always.
You're going through a couple of things. I just want to highlight a couple of those things really, really quickly. I don't know if people have heard of helping children how to think, not what to think. And the how to think is very much about getting them to do things on their own and helping them to understand how they came to that conclusion. And you do that a lot through questioning. We do it for adults too. I'm going to take the mud and put it on the table. Why would you do that? Because this will happen. What do you think might happen if that happens? And then you find that you get to a place where the child seeks to understand or starts to understand that the idea of bringing mud onto the table wasn't great. What we tend to do with children is say, don't do that. And the immediate question is, why? And people think that it's only children that are aged 0 to 5 years old that ask those questions. But teenagers ask the very same question. Why don't you want me to do that thing? So we need to really help our children how to think about what's happening around them, whether it's gender, whether it's race. That is very important. Another really important point that I want to just highlight that Krish made is around the teachable moments. Use all those moments to refer to the Bible. The parables that Jesus tells us are powerful. They're such amazing storytellers. We know that Jesus stood for justice, not injustice. He loved kindness. He spoke for the marginalized, children most especially. And so when we talk to children about the love of Jesus, you're actually helping them understand how to stand up for those who are marginalized. As a Christian, Krish, you'll remember this. When I first met you, I said, I am so blessed to be amongst others who speak of God with just happiness and joy. I worked in so many places where talking about Christ was seen as a horrible thing. So we've been marginalized as Christians.
Yeah.
Those moments have meant such a struggle for us, folks. Remember that feeling? That is the feeling we need to teach our children, and not teach them so that they learn from it, but teach them so that they can address it whenever they find themselves in that moment. So teachable moments, the parables of Jesus, the stories of Jesus. One of the things we've done here very practically is taken those parables and created them into a book so that we can refer to them. So they're parenting books on how to help your child do this. Create a parenting book with parables for your children on how to address injustice. Racial injustice is injustice. So it's how to address injustice. You don't have to be specific about racial injustice. Sorry, Krish, back to you.
No, man, it's always good. So helpful. Totally agree. Let me go. I think we got to number 5, and it's a good riff, because you want to be helping your kids engage with Scripture. It's such an important value here. All Scripture is God-breathed, so that it's useful for teaching, rebuking, and correcting, and training in righteousness, so that the people of God may be fully equipped for every good work. Your children will not be fully equipped to do the good works that God has prepared them in advance to do if they don't know the Bible. And parents and youth and children's workers in concert together need to have that as a common vision. As a parent, I can't outsource that to the youth worker. They don't have anywhere near like the access or credibility I have as a parent in terms of forming my children. But equally, youth and children's workers, you can't take that role away from parents. We need to include them. It's a tag team thing. In the opportunity that I was in, my parents were not Christian, so I had to rely on the church to do everything, to form me. But in my parenting, I want to work in concert with the youth and children's workers to do that. The problem is, and I think it was Irene raised it, is that somehow, partly because of a form of institutional racism, that the church whitewashed the Bible to the extent in which, as a young person growing up in a predominantly white church, I assumed everybody in the Bible was white. Every stained glass window I ever looked at had, white Jesus, white Peter, white Mary. I mean, it had to be white to let the light through, right? But every movie, Charlton Heston, every Jesus was we're getting better. You know, if you watch a TV show like The Chosen, they've deliberately chosen Middle Eastern people to play those roles, right? That's really, really powerful, really good. So we're getting better, but still, even in the illustrations in our kids' Bibles, it often looks white. So as Mary mentioned, my wife and I dared to write a children's book. We didn't dare to do it when our oldest children were little. We've had 30 children live in our house through fostering and adoption. We have 6 ongoing children. So we thought maybe we could dare to give it a go and try to write something for kids. So this book, Whistle Stop Tales Around the World in 10 Bible Stories, it's trying to celebrate the different levels of diversity there is in the Bible. So chapter 1 is the tale of the intrepid Iraqi who had a lot to lose. That's the story of Abraham. Chapter 2 is the tale of the extraordinary Egyptian who chose to go against the flow. Yeah, that's Pharaoh's daughter. Ruth is the tale of the giant-hearted Jordanian who went the extra mile. Naaman is the tale of the Syrian supervillain who had a dangerous secret. Esther is the tale of the important Iranian who wished her life away. Do you see what we're doing? We're just trying to celebrate the different nations that are touched by the Bible. And the illustrator, it went through a few rounds with the illustrator, but he's an amazing guy called Andy Gray. I don't know if you can see this, but it's kind of like David Walliams style illustrations, but there are no white faces. Everyone is somehow shaded. Does that make sense? Because if you see an unshaded person, you assume they're white. That's how it works in the imagination. So everybody is shaded in some form or another, which is actually anatomically correct, isn't it? There are literally no white people in the world. Everyone has some kind of shading. So this book is aimed at kind of 8 to 12-year-olds, and we're loving it. I was on a business call for my work the other day, and it was about child protection. And at the end, the lady just said, look, I know we're not supposed to talk about this here, but I'm Black, and it bothered me that there was no way I could help my children understand that Black people were included in the love of God from what they were reading. So your books really helped me. And I go, yes, that's what we wanted it for. So we're excited about it. If you want to, it's Christmas, right? Christmas is coming. If you want to bulk purchase any of these, I can help you if you want to buy 20 or more. So just email me and I can get you a good deal. Open the Bibles. 6, change heroes. When I was growing up, and it affected me to the extent that I wanted to name all my children after white missionaries. You ask for heroes. There was a book, 10 Boys Who Changed the World. There was another one, 10 Girls Who Changed the World. Guess what? They were all white people who had gone to other places around the world. And they were amazing people, right? I'm not knocking them, but if you tell kids that the heroes they need to aspire to are all white people, guess what? It excludes them from thinking other people have anything to offer. That affects white children about who they consider as being a worthy leader, and it affects Black children about how they consider themselves. So, think through the last sermon illustration you heard where it was a Black person that got to be the hero, and it wasn't just Hudson Taylor or Elizabeth Elliot or William Booth, or, find the illustrations that you need so that you can celebrate what Black people and people of color have done. Chances are Augustine was a Black person, right? But put a picture up if you're going to quote him so that people just don't assume he's white. I always assumed he's white because everyone I was ever quoted in a sermon was always white. So put some pictures up to help people see that you don't even have to say it. Oh, Augustine was Black. Just show it, right? That would be really, really helpful. Number 7, rethink missions. I haven't got a lot of time to show you this, but I Googled certain Christmas box appeals. And what happens when you do the Christmas box is you see loads of Black poor children receiving boxes from white families. And the mindset is that our relationship with the rest of the world is they are the receivers and we are the givers, right? That Africa really has got nothing to offer us. It's just a recipient. And by the way, the perception that most people have, and there's an amazing book called Factfulness, is that the whole of Africa is in absolute abject poverty. Now, that is not true. Sometimes, and I work with aid and development agencies, the aid and development sector, have added to those stereotypes, because the only time we ever put a black person up is if they're starving or if they're thirsty or if they, right? And so the perception is black people are either impoverished. Sometimes we portray black people as really stupid. So have you seen all those water commercials where it says, look what black people are feeding their kids, or giving their kids to drink, and it'll be muddy water. And you assume, oh no, black people don't know that muddy water is really bad for you, stupid black people. So just be really careful about the directionality of mission. The gospel didn't come from white people to the rest of the world. Guess what? It came from brown people. It came from Middle Eastern people. It went to India before it came to the UK. Africa got the gospel before anyone in Europe did, because of the Ethiopian eunuch, right? So we need to rewrite mission history so that we're able to understand the flow of the gospel around the world. But also, when you are calling kids to get involved in mission, and we should, do it in a way that's genuinely reciprocal, that you're working with people, not for people. And that can start with how you do those Christmas boxes. I'm not 100% sure I want to be doing Christmas boxes because of the way that they're framed. Okay, that's another hobby horse we need another conversation on. All right, last three. 8, form allies. If your child is white, how can your child be an ally in the classroom for children who otherwise feel marginalized? Okay. And I know that race is not the only way that people feel marginalized. Sometimes girls can feel marginalized in a patriarchal environment, for sure, right? Sometimes a child with a disability, a learning disability. Sometimes it's a child with who's not in a traditional home, but in a care experience situation, they feel marginalized. So what we're going to talk about, race, should translate into other forms of marginalization. But how can your child become the kind of child who's able to be an ally to a person in need? That can happen quite early in terms of the kind of friendships that we encourage, or the postures that we encourage. We talked earlier about trying to build empathy, helping your children ask empathetic questions about the other kids and how they're doing. That you can model that as a parent about how you address your child. Hey, it was really tough watching that on TV last night. How was it for you? And if you do that, guess what? Kids start doing that with their peers. Or you could ask that question. There are lots of kids in your school. I heard that one of the kids' mums is in a difficult position. How's that working out for them in the classroom? How are they doing? Oh, I don't know. I haven't thought about that. And then suddenly you're asking inquisitive questions that sends them out to be not a tattletale or a gossip, but an empathetic ally who can come alongside the children in their class. Number 9, yes, we've got to think about language. How do we do that? I think we talked early sorry, my camera keeps going off. We talked early in the process about asking permission, working with other people that to find out what's going on. Sometimes children will say things that are inappropriate, but you can gently help them. Some of my small children have called people fat. That's not appropriate. We say, but how do I help them? Oh, it's interesting that you use that word. I wonder how someone might feel if you use that word about them. Is there maybe there's a better way you can describe them? I wonder what that could be. I'm liking Chris's idea about teaching kids not just what to do, but how to think. Can we help kids on those journeys even when they say the wrong things? And finally, I guess I want to say, make sure, this should be unbelievably clear, make sure you are genuinely teaching the gospel to young people. For a lot of kids, they receive the gospel in the way that I did, which is about you having a personal relationship with Jesus, crossing over the bridge of the cross to go to eternal life. That gospel And it's the gospel that we, if you dissect a lot of our evangelism, that gospel is individualistic, escapist, and Gnostic. There's a whole other seminar in that. But a gospel that says nothing about our responsibilities to fellow human beings made in the image of God is not a Christian gospel. Because if Jesus can summarize the 630 Old Testament laws, not just as love the Lord your God, but also love your neighbor as yourself, if Jesus held those two together, any gospel that is just about love the Lord your God is not a Christian gospel. It has to be at least two-dimensional. It has to at least engage love the Lord your God and love your neighbor. And if it doesn't, that's a sub-Christian gospel. So reevaluate what you are considering the gospel that you're teaching to young people to make sure it's as full as the gospel that Jesus spoke. Oh man, we ran out of time a bit. I'm willing to go on a little bit longer. I know if you need to run, you need to run. But does anyone have some comments or some questions? But we gave you your 10 points. So at least we covered everything most of the things I was hoping to cover.
Krish, that was amazing. I don't know how you managed to fit so much into an hour. I've had one question. Do you have any, excuse me, I do apologize for my cough. Do you have any advice for bringing diversity into teaching, particularly inviting speakers when it's a very white space without feeling tokenistic? We do have many of our churches which have very few children and young people, yes, but are in places where they have become white enclaves. Yes. So how do we do that without tokenism?
So a lot of people are worried about tokenism. I think the difference between, pursuing genuine diversity and tokenism is often more about the motivation, right? Tokenism just means you're doing it for show, right? You're just doing it because, it's, I want to look right on and I want to tick a box. If your motivation is, no, I want to expose children to people from different cultures because it's really important to their spiritual formation, then I don't think it's tokenism anymore. Also, if you think, I've done it once and I never need to do it anymore. We did it for the last, we've done our 3-year visiting Black person. I guess that's tokenism too, right? So I think there are quite easy ways to do it. One is invite people. Right. And if you don't know the people, again, through the Church of England network that you're part of, I'm pretty sure we can find people. Maybe we need to start developing a kind of speaker list. It shouldn't be that difficult. Even if you start just Googling, authors of color, I think you can find them. So one is through visiting speakers, but there are enough online resources that you can do it quite easily. Kids, young people are very happy to learn from a video screen. In fact, often more happy to learn from a video screen than live in the room. So while you're waiting for that, raising up the Black leaders and teachers within your church, while you're waiting for that, make use of these other forms.
Yeah, Chris, that's really helpful. I was just going to ask, Chris, is there any final thing that you would like to say to us? And thank you, Chris, as well for your contribution right at the start and for your intervenings in the middle. But is there anything that you'd like to share with people just as we end?
No, thank you. Thank you. I mean, it really is on a couple of the last points that Krish made. I just want to remind people that the gospel is probably your best resource of teaching about good, justice and kindness and love. And there's so many songs we can sing in English and in many other languages that will celebrate Christ and his love that we can teach people about. The other 2 points I just want to make is exactly what Krish said. Don't make this a one-time event. That's when it starts to feel tokenistic. That's when you start to feel that you're doing it as a tokenistic approach. So start to introduce things like, welcome in various languages so that children ask, what does that mean? Or other children say, I recognize that. Have pictures. A really small example I'll give you is when I used to work with, when I used to do a lot of work around gender and engaging men in children's lives, there were some children's centers that had all men are dogs. People had them up. And I'd say that's definitely not going to invite any men in here to come and do anything with their children. But we've seen it with women too. People send women away with the way we do things. So even with race, remember that. My last point, Krish talked about language. Language has so much meaning and it can be so powerful.
Yeah.
So let us be careful about how we speak and what we say. And if we're not able to say it one step removed, read or bring a book in, or Google for a video. Let somebody else say it for you. Share the wisdom that you have learned in your hearing so that you're not burdened with the fear of getting it wrong.
Yeah, that's
really,
good.
really important. Language.
That's good. I just to close, and thank you, Chris. It's always a pleasure to work with you, and thank you, Mary, for facilitating today. It's been a pleasure. I would say, look, sometimes our fear of getting it wrong means we don't do anything at all. And I say it's better to humbly try something and get it wrong, but readdress. That actually models something important to children and young people, isn't it? That it's okay to be brave, to try something out, be, well-intentioned, do your homework, but have a go. I think that's important rather than just be silent. And again, children, I have found, have a great authenticity radar, and they can tell your heart and what you're trying to do. So, really good that you're here. Let's try and do what we can. But be humble enough if you get it wrong to go back and say, hands up, I got it wrong. Here, I used that phrase. That wasn't appropriate. I've learned something, but I've put it right. Let's move forward. So thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you, Krish. I think and we need to remember this is a long journey. We perhaps have not started it soon enough, but thank you to everybody who's here for the fact that you are taking steps along this journey. If you're in the Anglican Church, do get in touch with your diocesan children or youth advisor who will be able to help you further. The Children's Ministry Network is here for other denominations and for other organisations. We will send out a link to the recording and a link to the various resources following this. But thank you, Krish. Thank you, Chris. And thank you to all of you who are here today. Thank you.
Right. Take care, guys. See you. Bye-bye.